When you hear about someone committing an act of unimaginable cruelty, what's the first thought that comes to your mind? Maybe something like, what kind of monster could do that? We desperately like to believe that evil people are fundamentally different from us, that they think differently, feel differently, or were simply born with some kind of genetic defect. It divides the world into neat categories, bad apples over there and good people like us over here. But what if that's completely the wrong question? What if the better question is, what would it take for an ordinary good person to do something monstrous? That's the unsettling idea behind the Lucifer Effect by renowned psychologist Philip Zimbardo. Trust me, this isn't a breakdown of rare psychopaths. It's a look at people like you and me. Let's go back to August 1971. Imagine you're a college student at Stanford University. Walking through campus, you see a flyer asking for volunteers for a 2-week psychology experiment about prison life. It pays well, sounds interesting, and requires zero background. Would you sign up? Most of us would. 24 students did. Extensive psychological testing proved they were completely normal, healthy, and emotionally stable, with absolutely no history of violence or criminal records. Then, the researchers randomly split them into 2 groups by the literal flip of a coin. Half became prisoners and half became guards. No personality test determined who became what. Just a coin flip. What do you think happened? Maybe you'd expect them to awkwardly play along, laugh about it, and count down the days until they could go home. That's exactly what the researchers thought too. They were terrifyingly wrong. Within just 36 hours, the boundary between simulation and reality completely vanished. Zimbardo sat behind a hidden camera and watched ordinary students transform. The experiment was supposed to last 14 days. It lasted just 6. Not because the system failed, but because the situation was mutating the guards into tyrants and breaking the prisoners into hollow shells of themselves. Guards began inventing psychological torture techniques. They forced prisoners to clean toilet bowls with their bare hands, stripped them naked, and locked rebellious students in a dark, suffocating broom closet for solitary confinement. Zimbardo argued that we spend way too much time looking at the bad apple while completely ignoring what he calls the bad barrel. Evil isn't just an internal choice. It can be a byproduct of systemic situations. When you look inside the anatomy of this bad barrel, there are 3 specific psychological ingredients that can hijack anyone's internal moral compass. The first ingredient, anonymity and de-individuation. The guards were given identical khaki uniforms and mirrored sunglasses to completely hide their eyes. When you strip away a person's individual identity and blend them into a uniform, you erase their personal accountability. The moment a human being feels invisible, their darkest impulses are unleashed. We see this everywhere today, from toxic online trolling to mob mentality. The second ingredient, dehumanization. The prisoners were stripped naked and referred to only by ID numbers. When you stop looking at a person as an individual with a story and reduce them to a label, a number, an outsider, a metric, the brain's empathy centers completely shut down. It became easy to mistreat them because the guards weren't fighting a person, they were fighting a category. The third ingredient, blind obedience to authority. Under a dominant system, people stop asking, "Is this right?" and start asking, "Is this what I was ordered to do?" Years before the Stanford study, psychologist Stanley Milgram proved this explicitly. He ran a famous experiment asking regular people, barbers, clerks, white-collar professionals, to administer what they believed were lethal electric shocks to a stranger, simply because a man in a lab coat calmly said, "The experiment requires that you continue." An astonishing 65% of ordinary people flipped the switch all the way to a deadly 450 volts. They didn't do it because they were sadists. They did it because they surrendered their conscience to a system. They shifted the moral blame upward, whispering, "I'm just doing my job," or "I didn't make the rules." Here's the most uncomfortable part. If you had been randomly assigned to be a guard, do you honestly think you would have acted differently? Most of us immediately say, "Of course I would." But those Stanford students believe the exact same thing. Our behavior isn't shaped only by who we are, it's heavily shaped by where we are. Give someone power, remove accountability, create an us versus them mentality, and the line between right and wrong starts moving. And it doesn't happen all at once. It happens one tiny silent compromise at a time. We look at these experiments and think, that's extreme. I'm not in a prison, and I'm not shocking anyone. But the Lucifer effect plays out in miniature every single day in our offices, our schools, and our social circles. Think about the corporate team that stays silent about a dangerous, flawed product because nobody wants to upset the boss or lose their bonus. Think about the toxic friend group that relentlessly excludes a colleague, where everyone joins in just to keep their status. Think about the moment you saw something deeply unfair at work, but whispered to yourself, "It's not my department. I need to mind my own business." The moment you let a title, a corporate culture, or a crowd dictate your morals, you have stepped right into Zimbardo's basement. You haven't suddenly become evil. You've just let the barrel shape the apple. Thankfully, this isn't just a story about how dark the world can get. It's a map on how to protect your own mind. If a bad situation can manufacture cruelty, ordinary goodness can be elevated into heroism by a single choice. Zimbardo calls this the heroic imagination, or the banality of heroism. A hero isn't a mythical creature with a cape. A hero is simply an ordinary person who, when placed in a corrupt system, makes a conscious choice to step out of line and say, no. In the Stanford experiment, the real hero wasn't a prisoner. It was a young graduate student named Christina Maslock. She stepped into that basement on day 5 to conduct interviews, looked at the conditions, and confronted Zimbardo directly, saying, "What you are doing to these boys is terrible." She was the only person out of dozens of academic observers to speak up. Her lone voice broke the psychological spell, snapped Zimbardo back to reality, and forced the entire operation to shut down the very next day. True strength doesn't mean building a tough exterior to dominate others or blend into a powerful crowd. It means having the moral clarity to stand guard over your own mind, to resist the pressure of the environment, and to refuse to let the barrel dictate who you are. So maybe the question we should ask ourselves isn't, am I a good person? Maybe the better question is, what kind of environment is shaping the person I'm becoming? Character is built in the small, repetitive choices we make every single day, the systems we tolerate, and the moments we decide whether to follow the crowd or stand up for what's right. Because evil doesn't always begin with hatred. Sometimes it just begins with silence. And if ordinary people can slowly drift toward cruelty, then ordinary people can also choose compassion. The next time a system, a job, or a crowd tells you to compromise your integrity, remember the Stanford basement. Take off the mirrored sunglasses, look at the human being in front of you, and find the courage to step away. When your moment comes, which direction will you choose?